everyone. We're Rutgers Blueprint. My name is Heeral. I'm a senior majoring in computer science, and we're both a part of the software engineering track.
My name is Palak, and I'm a BA in computer science major as a freshman. And yeah.
Okay, so we're going to be talking about working in a SWE team at a hackathon, and then also just comment like best practices for working on a SWE team in industry.
So first off, forming a team. What essentially does that look like? There's two ways a essential group of people can come together to work on a project. It's either in a group form or a team form. Ideally, you want to be striving towards the team, mainly because of the differences between the two. So when you're in a group, it's more individualized work where you have individual responsibilities, and whether you succeed or fail is not really relevant to the entire group of people, but rather just to what you worked on. However, when you're working in a team, it's a shared effort where you're trying to come together to solve a common problem. So in our case, when you are working in a hackathon or in any group-like setting, try to strive to become more inclined as a team, mainly because you want to keep helping each other, build off of each other's ideas, and continue collaborating to get to a better goal in the future. So there are several complementary skills that you might see when working together. First off, the technical skills, which is a necessary aspect when you want to work in a group itself, in a team, that you all will see when you're working on your projects. But at the same time, in order to be an effective communicator, you need to be able to problem solve and navigate through all of the issues that you might be facing. On top of that, there's a lot of decisions that you might need to make, whether you want to style your project in one way or change up an idea last minute, whatever that may be, these decision-making skills will be really necessary, but at the same time, very important. So the aspect of communicating effectively and making sure you guys are all able to agree on what the idea is really important. And lastly, interpersonal skills. So you want to make sure that you're able to be more friendly and make sure that the entire team is able to connect with your ideas. And the best way to do that is to be more open about what you're thinking, so you don't feel shut out from that entire team, but rather you feel like you're a part of it. Now, these values itself will be increased as the size of the team decreases. So make sure to be as friendly and as open as you can in terms of communication. So let's get more into the different aspects of a team. Not necessarily will it be an equal balance of roles in a team, mainly because when you get into future, say, groups or teams in the future, in companies or even at hackathons like this, not everyone has the same exact responsibilities, and you'll see that when you're working. First off, one possibility is a product manager, and this essentially comes more later when you're actually working at companies, but essentially the idea is, the basic definition is champion customers throughout the product lifestyle by empathizing with users, understanding what their problems are worth solving, and define how to measure any value. Really what that means is a product manager is the essential leader of this group, and their goal is to make sure that whatever product they're working on has that measurable success that they were looking for at the beginning. And it's not necessarily an idea of being a dictator, right? That's necessarily not exactly what you don't want to do, but rather you want to make sure you're able to integrate different parts of your team, and we'll get into what those other parts are, and making sure that they're able to collaborate with each other to get that product or idea onto actual paper. So you can think of them like the CEO of any product that you're working on. Now, there's a difference between what a good product manager does and a not necessarily the best, I'll say. There's a difference mainly because sometimes as a product manager, you have to know when to say what. So essentially, in order to actually convey the idea of your product, you have to be a great storyteller. Without letting people believe what you are saying, it is really hard for anyone to agree that that product that you are creating or working on is worthwhile. So being a good storyteller will help in making sure that whatever idea you came up with has an actual reason, and helping others agree with the reasoning behind that product itself. Also, product managers that are effective always focus on learning and growth rather than having a stagnant progress. So that's where the key concept of multipliers comes in. Multiplying is essentially when you want to have growth in a long term, not just in a short term. So looking at the bigger perspective rather than, say, a few months from now. In your case at the hackathon, this might not be as relevant because it is a shorter term. However, at the end of the day, when you are going to be working in larger groups or teams later on at companies, this will be an important key concept. Lastly, make sure to share all of the context with your team. Everyone is there to work on that project together, whether it's short scale or in the long term, short term, whatever it may be. You want to make sure that everyone knows exactly what's going on. That way they have the full picture and are able to effectively support the project in whatever needs they might need to. And lastly, one of the last things, you also need to make some percentage decisions in that actual team. Like I said before, these decisions are not solely based on one person. It's a collective decision between every member of that team. So what you want to do is to make sure that as a product manager, you take into account every person's ideas and perspectives, and then finally, when there is, say, a debate or a dispute of any kind, that's when the product managers really step in to make that final decision. But initially, it's a collective decision as a whole. And lastly, it's really about solving problems. In order to be a good product manager, problems will arise in any group setting that you're in. So being able to effectively navigate those problems is really what makes the difference between an effective product manager and one that's working towards improving their skills even more. All right, so what does the day in the life of a PM really look like? Essentially, like I've mentioned before, a product manager is not just the leader of that group, but really they're a blend of different skills from the UI UX team, the tech team, or even the business team. It's really a combination of all of those teams that will be looking forward to the PM for their lead on that project. So first off, there's a lot of specificities that come with being a PM. First off, you have to actually conduct a product by using market user research. So when you're actually creating a product, say even for projects for your hackathon, you don't want to just create something without knowing what already exists out there in the real world. That way you can navigate the actual ideas that have already been created and then actually add on to that product versus create the same thing to actually show growth with what your idea is. On top of that, conceptualizing and prioritizing features, it's a really great feeling when you have a bunch of ideas for a certain project you're working on. I know for myself, when I've had multiple, where I have this project, I come up with all these crazy ideas that may work, may not work, but it's really about filtering all of them out and picking the best, maybe top 5, top 10, but you don't want to make that list too long, otherwise your idea gets lost within the process. Furthermore, you also want to integrate your ideas and all of your solutions, so making sure to just find a blend between all of them to make sure that they align with the actual goal and aren't straying too far from it. Another thing that you might be seeing in the future is organizing, leading, and facilitating any sprints. So this really just means when you're in charge of getting that team to get something productive out of that day. And one method is Agile, which we'll talk about a little bit later in the slides. Another thing is having a long-term picture. You need to craft a roadmap of what you want your product to actually look like later down the line. So it's a great idea to be working in the moment, but at the same time, you want to know what your goal for that day, that next day, maybe week, month looks like, so you can actually start achieving it now, and rather than being backtracked when you realize, oh, I didn't do something. So it's a really good idea to have a roadmap which kind of plans out exactly what you want to have in the future. Make sure you have enough resources, so that also comes with planning. And just define the success metrics. success really looks different for every project. It depends on what you really think success is for your product itself. So making sure you have those metrics defined before, such as right now for you guys in the hackathon, it really makes sense to have an idea of what your level of success would be out of today's work that you will be doing. And lastly, make sure the consumers agree as a product, as a PM. So ideally, the product that you're making is for the consumers. It's not just so you can create a product because it looks good, feels good, anything along those lines. As long as it addresses one of the consumer's concern, that is a great product. So we want to make sure that consumers are really in tune with whatever idea you're actually bringing to life. All right, so onto product marketing. This is another aspect of a team that is a little similar to PMs, but not at all at the same time. So essentially, the idea of a product marketer is they need to connect the dots between the actual product and the actual market. So earlier before, I said that consumers are really important when you're working in creating a product, and that's where the product marketers really come in, making sure that the actual market and consumers they're working for is aligned with the ideas and goals of your product. So as you can see in the image, the difference or the place where the product marketers really lie is in the middle of the actual product, the sales and growth of that product, and also the marketing. So making sure to combine all those together, it's really important to understand what the market really needs and make sure that what the market needs is being met by your product, so shaping that product, and then finally communicating what those needs are to your team and then later to your consumers as well. So the next aspect of a team in professional settings looks more like a product designer or a UI UX researcher or designer. In this case, what you really want to do is create a user interface that makes the consumer want to come back. Have you ever seen some feature of different apps that looks really great and you're like, wow, this is something that really is unique, that makes it stand out? And that's why a lot of apps nowadays are doing really well, because of these unique features. At the same time, you want to make sure that whatever you're creating also has a unique feature to it that makes it stand out. And one way to do that is have a nice user interface that makes it appealing to look at the eye, but also easy to use. Now, this directly impacts your sales and the success of your product, which may not be as relevant today, but at the same time, you want to make this growth mindset, you want to make sure you have that growth mindset in mind, whether it's for now just as a practice, or even in the future when you're going to have to implement this in the real world. Now, by show of hands, do any of you know what Google Plus really is? Nice. It's nice to see the hackathon coordinators and you know. But really, I see that none of the actual, personally, I didn't know what Google Plus was either. But really, it's just another version of Facebook that was created by Google a while ago that they wanted to actually implement, but it was not as successful as they hoped. But on the other hand, if we say look at another version of a UI UX design by Pinterest, look at the actual flow and design of their product, right? It looks very streamlined, very organized, and has a visual appeal to what they are trying to promote. In this case, their waterfall-like flow to the images actually makes me interested in clicking different buttons or different links or features that they have to see more about it. And the whole point is you want to make it attracting to the user or the customer to make sure they actually come back and you gain that retention every time. And now one of the last things in working as a team is a product software engineer. So you guys all at the hackathon might be thinking this should have been the only thing maybe on a team, but as you've seen, there's other parts to a team that makes them successful, but this is very crucial as well. The person that actually builds that project and makes it, builds it out to fruition, really. So there's a whole cycle that software engineers go through when working on a project itself. Usually it starts with designing your actual idea. So this is a more collaborative step make sure to include your entire team members in this step, because designing it really comes from a collaborative effort. Once you have the design down for your goal and your actual product, then it comes to development. When you're actually building, coding, writing out all of the different steps you want for your project. And don't stop there. This is what normally people do. They just forget about the future steps, but really it's important to test to make sure that your project works the way you want it to, and then from there, actual deployment. So this is actually publishing it and hosting it in the real world setting, where you're then going to possibly face a lot of issues. If your testing went well, maybe this won't happen, but that's not likely the case. There will be some issues, some features that users don't like, and that's where maintenance comes in. You have to keep updating and constantly changing what you originally had to make it even better than it was before. And lastly, the analysis. This is also a very important step, which is really just seeing how did the actual creation of your product come to life, and was it as successful as you intended it to be? For the purposes of your hackathon today, you'll mainly be working on designing, development, testing, even deployment and maintenance and analysis. In fact, all of these different parts of the cycle are really relevant today, so make sure that you are following this, schedule, tips, whatever you may want to call it, but it's really important to follow all of them in order to actually create your idea as successfully as possible. Now, as we've seen, there are the different types of people in a team. How do you actually come together to now collaborate to make sure you're actually getting something done? One of the ways to collaborate is through Discord, which you all have been using already, but it's really effective in communicating if, say, you're not in person, face-to-face. Aside from that, you can also use Zoom to get that more in, personal touch if you wanted to, say, share any ideas, or not just use text message feature to communicate. Another thing, say you're working on your software engineering aspect of your project and actually coding the project, and say you want to work together. One thing you can do is use VS Code live sharing. What essentially it is the Google Docs of coding, you can think of it, where you can come together and actually have one person's screen share the entire your entire screen and your project, and then work on it together via the actual VS Code live share. So you can see in real time all of the changes and adaptations that are being made, and then this way collaborate together. And one of the other things that you might be seeing more in the future, not necessarily today, is Slack communication, which is another app that is used for communication, very similar to Discord, but different in its own way, and it's more for a professional setting. Now, on top of that, another thing you might be using is GitHub or Git to actually share your code with each other, build off of each other's ideas, and that's really how you can change your codes and merge it together once you're actually done with your entire idea. So make sure to look at all of these different types of communications and try to facilitate it in the way that's most appropriate to you guys. But yeah.
All right, thank you, Palak. So now we're just going to go into some team building ideas and just like general tips and tricks of right when you start working with a new team, how to really get that environment going. So some team building activities that we can consider are, well, you guys have already mostly done this, but just brainstorming ideas. So what technologies am I interested in? Or what's the purpose or the idea of the project? Or what do you want to accomplish during the hackathon? And or what other softwares have you used in the past that you felt were missing some feature that you really want to implement, or you think that your product will be better because you implement this one feature, or something that hasn't been created before that you really want access to. And so this hackathon won't have this, but in future larger hackathons, you can also look at the challenges that companies offer, and they have specific genres for categories that you can also base your ideas off of. So just some team brainstorming. The way that you think about a product is you come up with features that you want. And the way you think about the features is what the user, how you want the user to interact with your website or your app, and what functionality you want to provide them. So here you can think about an existing app and one way to make it better. Okay, so does anyone know what an elevator pitch is? Show of hands. And okay, cool. We got some people. Okay, so an elevator pitch is basically sell your idea to someone who can fund your project in 15 seconds or less. So that's the typical elevator ride, right? So you get in the elevator, you have 15 seconds to tell them why this is the best product ever and why they need to fund your product. And this is something you guys should be thinking about in the back of your mind when you're coming up with your project, because it will come in really handy when you're judging. Because judging is going to be very similar. Your judge is going to come to you, they're going to ask you, okay, what's cool about your project? What did you guys do? And you have whatever, like 15 seconds to 1 minute to really just display all the work that you've done. Okay, so moving on to some team communication and collaboration. So in a hackathon setting, the really key element of a team is accountability and the sense of like mutual accountability, because these are small teams, so you want to be able to rely on your teammates for getting their part of the work done, as well as the restricted time commitment that you have for this hackathon means that you really have to communicate very effectively and really well in order to build the end product that you want to see. So one key way to do this is using paired programming. So when would you use paired programming? So some uses are when you're learning a new technology, it's really beneficial to sit with one of your partners and either share your screen or just look on one screen and go through and learn some of the documentation or the basic uses and setup for the technology. Also, paired programming can be used when you're sharing new technology, so or when you're sharing knowledge of a technology that your partner might not know and you're teaching them how to use it. Another good time to use it is when you're stuck on a problem and you need help. Then you can pull in another developer and go through your code with them. Another great way when to use it is when you're implementing larger features that are going to involve multiple team members anyways. So if they're collaborating with you from the beginning, then everyone is up to date on the progress and the how well the code is working at the moment. And you might be a little surprised that this is here, but paired programming does increase your efficiency. So I know you might be thinking, why two people working on the same project? Why would that increase your efficiency? But it actually helps you when you're brainstorming ideas of, okay, how do I want to solve this algorithm, or how do I want to implement this? And you throw out an idea, your partner throws out another idea, and turns out they find a flaw in your idea. So you can go back and forth and really iron out the kinks right before you even start implementing your project idea. So one really cool thing that I would suggest you guys look into during this hackathon, you don't have to use it, but it'll come in really handy, is GitHub project tracking. So it's in the project tab on your GitHub repo. But so basically this gives you these 4 columns here. The first one says backlog. So this is like when you're implementing features, you wanna have specific tasks that each team member is gonna do, and you wanna break it down as explicitly as possible and assign a task to a person. So once that task is done, or once they started working on it actually, you can move that task from your backlog into the next column over, which is to do. So when you're about to implement the feature, you can move it to do. Then when the feature is, when you're working on it, you move that to in progress. So this keeps every person in your team really up to date on the progress that you're making on your code, as well as keeps track of the status of your feature. And then also one step that I didn't notice here, but one thing that usually comes up in software engineering roles is a code review after you're done with your implementation of your feature. And the code review is after you think that your feature is done, you want a couple other developers to take a look at your code and make sure that there aren't any bugs or kinks in it that you didn't realize existed. Okay, so now let's shift gears a little bit into industry SWE practices. So one really cool thing that industry does is something called daily scrum or stand-up. And this also has the same like functionality as the chart on the last page did, but basically this is where every person in the team gets into one room in the morning and everyone stands up one by one, tells everyone in their team what they're going to be working on today, what they finished, what issues they've had, or if they need help, they'll bring in people at this point. So this is a way to really like build your team camaraderie and understand exactly where your product is. One other thing they do is breaking down features into user stories. So I mentioned some of these words before, but let me just break that down a little bit. So a feature is, for example, if I want to build an app, let's say I want to like rent out cars for like a day. A customer wants to get on my application and they want to rent out a car for a day. If that's the feature that I want to implement, I'm going to break that down into user stories. So what exactly would a customer want in that one feature, that like specific features that they might want, and that can be broken down further, and that will help show it'll keep your documentation for all the features that you're trying to implement. Some other software that's used in software engineering industry is Jira and Confluence, and this is also very similar to the GitHub tab that I showed you. Okay, so something that's used in industry a lot, you may have heard it, it's a buzzword, but Agile Methodology. So Agile Methodology is when you come up with, so your team will work on a ton of user stories, so those are all the features you want to implement for your app. And then, let's say I have 6 months to implement my application. So this is a little bit more of a long-term strategy, but that 6 months will be broken down into short sprints, where each sprint you want to implement some sort of use case by the end of that sprint. So if I'm going back to my example of I want to be able to like rent a car for a day, that would be one story that I might try to implement within, let's say, like a 2-week sprint. And this keeps people motivated and makes sure that there's really regular progress moving along through the 6 months of the product development. So this first starts out in the planning phase. So that's what you guys probably did when you were brainstorming. And after that, it moves on into the implementation phase. And you'll be working on this most of the time here. But while you're implementing, then you can also have daily scrum, where each day you stand up and tell everyone your progress. And after the sprint is over, after the 2 weeks are over, then you have a review. So this is where everyone really comes together and makes sure that the progress that we needed to happen at that time was done. So these would be done by more of the like leadership roles in the team. And we'll talk more about that later as well. And then after you've reviewed and you've analyzed the progress that was made in that sprint, then you move on and go back into implementation and review, and the cycle will continue. Okay, so I mentioned assigning roles. So assigning roles is really important in industry. Not so much in a hackathon because your groups are extremely small. So as long as you're all collaborating and are accountable for the progress that you want to make, then you don't really need to assign roles. But in industry, there are 3 main leadership roles that come into play for a Scrum team, or that uses Agile methodology. So one role is a Scrum Master. So what they do is they lead the product management, and they make sure that the progress in each sprint is followed. And then we have a product owner, which is responsible for contacting stakeholders, and this is more of outside of your software engineering aspect of it, but they collaborate with the venture capitalists and all the other funding along with your Scrum Master to make sure that the product is following the deadline. And then the team leader. So this is sort of an informal role, but they're really the person that's going to facilitate the motivation that your team members have, and yeah, I think that's all we have for you. If you guys have any questions, feel free to ask away. Otherwise, happy hacking.